About 22 years ago, I was browsing through the dingiest sections of the school library in my secondary school. At a time when most people went to the library to study for a test or an exam, I went there to find completely new magical worlds hidden away in the hundreds of books that lined the shelves of the library. The books that I sought out were usually the dustiest and the least used. And I often found myself late for classes because I was reading a book that was so rare that it wasn't allowed to be taken out of the library. It was during one of these book hunting sessions that I discovered one book that changed my life forever. This book was called The Engineer in Wonderland by Eric Lathwaite. And it took me on a wonderful journey of electricity, magnetism, and all sorts of physics magic, all told with the narrative helpings from Alice in Wonderland. The Engineer in Wonderland is an exquisite and extremely nerdy journey in science, specifically electromagnetism, and how it was being used to innovate in ways that we had never seen before. But it was the style of the writing in the book that was exceptional. You see, Eric Lathwaite, the author of the book, used to deliver Christmas lectures to school children in the UK, and as it turns out, was a fan of Alice in Wonderland. He wrote the book with references, quotes, and passages from Alice in Wonderland, and in doing so created a world of science and engineering that was so rich, so complex, so rewarding, and so hilarious, and yet so approachable that even a young child like me could instantly get it. The book made me fall in love completely with the idea that young people could love and enjoy learning science. It was an absolutely magical experience for me, and my hope for sharing this with you today is that we all recognize the need to assist in radically transforming education so that every child can fall in love with learning. So after reading The Engineer in Wonderland for a few weeks and jotting down all sorts of experiments in my notebook, I approached my physics teacher and asked him if we could try one of the experiments in the school laboratory. It was this awesome experiment that involved making objects float through electricity or something like that. The details are lost to time. He told me, without skipping a beat, that this was not important or useful or relevant because it wasn't in the school curriculum. He told me to focus on my books and the tests coming ahead. I was devastated. Now, I had had a pretty frustrating childhood. I grew up in the 90s, in a world without the internet, without access to the books that I needed, and I yearned to understand how the world worked. I spent my days making and tinkering with all sorts of things to help me figure out this world that I lived in. I tried making robots. I built machines that almost flew, but not quite. I even tried making my own video games. So when I heard all the wonderful stories about secondary school with all the science, the labs, and the subjects like chemistry and physics and biology, I was super excited to eventually join secondary school. But here I was, standing in front of my physics teacher, and he just told me that the physics thing that I was really excited about learning was not important at all. So I returned to the library dejected. But the book had sowed a seed. It had shown me that science could be fun and that complex topics could be explained very simply to young children and that they could get it. It had showed me that learning didn't have to be boring, but fun and magical, and that learning could have purpose beyond just the rote memorization required to pass the next examination. And over the next few years of my life, a dream grew, one in which more African children like me had access to great education, committed teachers, and a science teaching environment that enabled and empowered the children. It's been more than 20 years since that revelation, and in that time, the dream that I had has come true. In 2011, I started an organization that has now worked with more than 10,000 students in Uganda, with a wonderful and strongly committed team that's working to accelerate science learning on the continent. The primary tool that we use is robotics. We create an environment in which our students give us permission to teach them, and in turn we give purpose to their learning. Because once you know the destination for your learning, and that destination is exciting, then everything else comes naturally. In this time, we've seen students' hope restored. We've traveled to remote communities and helped disadvantaged and underserved students get excited about science in ways that blew our minds. We've given purpose and passion to thousands of students. But I want to challenge you. I have a dream to go further. What if we pushed that ideology further? Right now, education on the African continent is still very traditional and very passive. Since I was in school, learning has become so singular and linear that classes have basically become examination preparation sessions. We sit in large packed rooms and the teacher stands at the front of the class dictating notes which have to be regurgitated onto an exam sheet at the end of the school year. But we can change this. I believe we can. I believe that we can bring passion and purpose and meaning to education beyond just the need to memorize information. We can extend science learning or all learning beyond the material mandated by the curriculum. And in doing so, we can create an environment in which students thrive not because the education structure demands it, but because their own curiosity drives their learning. I also believe that we can fuse cultural African learning styles, traditional learning, and modern technology tools to create the classroom of the future. A classroom in which collaborative and peer-driven learning models create a scenario in which the teacher is a guide, not a master. A classroom in which the teacher is not a gatekeeper of knowledge whose word is absolute, but becomes a mentor and enabler of learning, guiding discovery by opening doors and letting the students explore. A classroom in which the teacher becomes confident enough to let students open their own doors and discover magical new worlds. What does this classroom look like? I don't know. I have no clue. But I'm trying to figure it out. But it requires an intentionality and a willingness that not many governments or education bodies are willing to provide just yet. It requires tools that don't exist yet, and it will challenge teachers to adapt and grow in ways they have never even dreamed of before. But we have to start the thinking now, and we have to start experimenting now and today. Because the learning and the classrooms that worked for you or for me are not the classrooms that will work for our children and our children's children. Because somewhere out there's a child who's excitedly talking to their teacher about virtual reality, robotics, and blockchain. And the poor, clueless teacher is shaking their head in desperation and telling the child to focus on the next test and the next exam and what's in the curriculum. We can do better. We have to do better. Thank you.